Okay. Muy buenos días a todos ustedes que están escuchándonos en la comunidad latina en el estado de Minnesota. Estamos frente a las cámaras acá en la sesión del Comité Judicial y de Finanzas y Ley Civil de la Casa de Representantes del estado de Minnesota. Vamos a proporcionarles a ustedes esta mañana interpretación simultánea sobre la discusión sobre la ponencia de la HF4 que contiene la ponencia de ley para las licencias para todos, las licencias de conducir para todos. Muchas gracias. En el momento en que comience el comité a sesionar, estaremos proporcionándoles la interpretación. Muy bien. Estoy llamando la apertura de la sesión de este comité. Estamos el 12 de enero de 2023. Tenemos el quórum presente. Vamos a comenzar directamente. Están aprobando en ese momento las minutas del acta de la sesión pasada. Se propone la aprobación de las minutas del 10 del 23. Del 10 de enero de 2023. Queda aprobada.
All right, the minutes are approved. First on our agenda is House File
Lo primero en
4.
nuestra agenda que tenemos es HF4. Representante Gómez, usted podría pasar, podría solicitar que la 4B sea recomendada al Comité de Medios y Arbitrios. Representante Gómez, usted tiene la enmienda H17. Vamos a ver si esta es la que nos interesa. Parece que no. Vamos entonces a guardar silencio hasta que tengamos la HF4. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn and members of the committee. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to explain the A17 very simply because that's what I can do about it. I think if there are further questions.
Oh, sí, un momento, sí. Tenemos a Aisha Gómez, nuestra representante. Ella está diciendo que todos los datos contenidos en la HF4 están diseñados para asegurar que los datos de identificación personal únicamente son utilizados para la intención de la licencia. Sí, tenemos que establecer la identidad de las personas para poder emitir una licencia de conducir. Entonces, quería asegurarme que los datos se usan únicamente se mantienen en confidencialidad. Esta parte de la ley. Si tienen alguna pregunta.
Nathan Hopkins Day,
sí.
If we need him.
Sí, le necesitamos, vamos a decirles alguna pregunta que ustedes tengan para la representante Johnson. No, representante Gómez, veo que la H17 requiere una destrucción de datos 14 días después de haberlos haberle validado. ¿Cuál es el estatuto y requisito para los datos personales de los residentes de Minnesota y la destrucción de los datos? Representante Gómez, yo estoy suponiendo que usted va a querer contestar esto. ¿Sabe usted? Sí, me encantaría hacerlo.
Madam Chair and members,
miembros, si ustedes pueden ver la H17 en 1.9, dice que no obstante la sección 131.7 tiene los estándares del estatuto en relación a las políticas de retención de documentos para las agencias gubernamentales. Entonces, el Departamento de Seguridad Pública dice que los servicios de administración para emisión de licencias y vehículos y documentación sobre vehículos, ellos tienen sus propios horarios para mantener la información, así que no sé exactamente lo que dice la ley interna, pero esto no impediría que se decida una retención específica, así que en este momento no sabemos cuál es el periodo de retención de datos privados, pero normalmente son 14 días. Representante Gómez, esa era mi preocupación. Un horario de retención diferente donde se mantiene los datos por menos tiempo de lo que regularmente debe de tenerse.
I think we should have everything
Yo creo que
equal
tenemos que
and
tener todo
everything be
debe
the
ser
same if we're going to go
igual
through this
de la misma
process.
manera,
But now you're giving special
con los mismos términos en vez de
attention to
darles
those that aren't here legally.
términos especiales que podrían ser
Response,
ilegales.
Representative Gomez or Representative Perez Vega.
Representante, ¿tiene que alguna de ustedes quiere
Chair
contestar?
Becker Finn and
Eh,
Representative Johnson.
Jefe del
So,
comité,
the
Becker,
intention
Finn
here
y
is really
Johnson.
just to ensure that
Realmente aquí lo que estamos poniendo
data
es
that
más que
people
todo para
provide to
asegurar
access
que los
driving
datos que las
privileges
personas
are used
que dan
for that
sus
purpose and no
datos
other purpose.
se utilizan sus datos únicamente para el objetivo para
Any
el
other
que dieron los datos
discussion
ni
to
para
the
otro
underlying
objetivo.
A17
¿Alguna otra
amendment?
discusión de la
Representative Gross.
H17? Es la enmienda
I understand
H17.
your, thank you, Madam Chair.
Sí, tengo
I
entendido que
understand your purpose for it.
tengo
So
entendido el objetivo.
with this new knowledge, would you
Con estos
consider
nuevos
changing that
conocimientos, ¿estarías
to make all
considerando
things on an
cambiar
equal playing field?
para que todos
So that they're
todo quede
retaining that
parejo, todos,
information
pero o sea,
as long
retener la
as
información
everyone
media
else's
vez
information?
que se retenga a la vez que se retiene
Representative
toda la
Gross, I believe that
información del
would be
resto de las personas.
We'd have a
Yo
lot more
creo que
testifiers here if we
tenemos
were
muchas
changing
personas que van a
everything in that
testificar
statute, but Representative
y
Gomez.
en el momento representante Gómez tiene la
Thank
respuesta.
you, Chair Becker Finn
Gracias,
and
Chair
Representative
Beckerfield,
Grossell. I
jefe
mean,
Beckerfield
I'm sort of
y
submitting
representante.
the
Estoy
materials
presentando
like
los
this, and that's
materiales
my intention.
y esta es mi intención.
You know, with what we're doing today.
Como por lo
Representative
que vamos a
Your
ocuparnos el
intention
día
is
de hoy.
to
Su intención
submit
es
it as
que
is,
presentarla como está
no
escrita.
changes?
¿No cambios? ¿No quiere hacerle
If
cambios?
you're asking if
Si usted está
I'm
preguntándome
willing
si
to
yo
change
estoy
what I'm
dispuesto a
presenting,
cambiar lo que estoy
this is
presentando,
the bill before us and
la
the amendments
propuesta ante
are what
nosotros
I'm
de
presenting for the
esta
committee's
ley,
consideration today. So
estamos presentándola como usted la acaba de escuchar
Yep, and
para que
I'll
ustedes
note
la
that I
consideren.
did extend the
Voy a
amendment
anotar que
deadline because I did realize there
extendí
was
la
a time crunch with the
la
official and gross
fecha
edition, so
de
we did.
finalización para
Members had
presentar
plenty
la
of time to
enmienda,
file amendments
pero
if
para
they
que
would
es
have liked
importante que
to.
los
And
miembros
we do have an amendment to the
de
amendment.
presentar alguna enmienda a
Any
enmiendas.
further follow-up on your question, Representative
Si
Gross?
usted tiene alguna otra pregunta,
Any other discussion to the
alguna
A17?
otra discusión
Representative
sobre la
Thank you, Becca Finn.
A17.
I just want to make sure,
Sí,
and perhaps this
jefe
is being
Beckerfield,
researched right now, but is it
queremos
longer? Do
asegurarnos
we
que
know that that's
es
accurate?
más tiempo, va a ser más largo. ¿Es eso con lo correcto?
Mr. Hopkins.
Madam Chair and members, so I think that the
Yo
department would
creo
have to
que
tell us
el
exactly what their
departamento va a tener
retention
que decirnos
schedule is in
exactamente
terms of
cuál
how
es el
long they
horario de
keep
retención de ellos
documents and
para
applications
a la hora
regarding
de con
other
documentos y
license types,
solicitudes
other driver's
con
licenses.
los tipos de otros
Representative
con los
Okay,
documentos
I
de
would
otras
just like to make
licencias.
sure that
Sí
what we're
quiero
hearing is
asegurarme
actually
que
the case in
eso
statute
es el
before we
asunto en el
say that
estatuto
that is not being honored by the
y que
authors.
no se
Thank you.
y que es
And
respetado por los
with-
autores.
Representative Scott. the A17.
Representante
Thank you, Madam
Scott,
Chair, and that was going to be my
muchas
question. I was going to
gracias.
ask if there's anybody here
Quería
from DPS.
preguntarle si hay alguien
that
aquí
could
el
speak to the
DPS que
retention
podría
schedule.
hablar sobre el horario, el
I
tiempo
don't
que
know
ellos
who all
retienen
the
la
folks
documentación.
are
Yo
that
no
work for them. I
sé
don't.
si todos se encuentran acá o están. ¿Hay alguien acá?
Okay,
El departamento de
I don't know, Madam Chair,
colaboradores.
if they know the answer to that
Um,
question.
Yeah, and feel
No
free
sé
if
si
you're
existe,
willing to
tiene
come
la
up with an
respuesta.
answer, we would love to have the answer.
Nos encantaría saber cuál es la respuesta a todos
Thank you.
nosotros. Gracias.
All right, welcome to the committee. Please introduce
Bienvenidos
yourself
al comité.
and go
Por
ahead.
favor, preséntese.
Madam Chair, Representatives.
Son
My
buenos
name
días,
is Katie
representantes.
Madigan, and I'm
Kiki
with the Department of Public
Madigan,
Safety,
del Departamento
Driver
de
and
Seguridad
Services.
Pública
And
y
our current
Servicios
retention
para
schedule
los
is 10 years.
Vehículos.
We keep
Son
documents
10
for 10
años
years
en que
before
nosotros
destroying.
mantenemos los documentos antes de destruirlos, por
Right,
10 años.
follow-up, Representative Scott.
Well, that is quite a
Representante
difference
Scott,
and quite
esa es
an
una gran
inconsistency.
diferencia y no hay una
And
consistencia entre las dos
I've had
propuestas.
a long-standing
He
issue with
tenido
the data
un
retention
asunto
schedules
con
and all of,
bastante
they're all
importante,
over
es
the
importante
place
para mí
in
sobre
in
la protección
government,
de
and
documentos a
there's
nivel
no
gubernamental y no
consistency.
hay consistencia entre
And
los agentes
actually, the data
gubernamentales.
retention,
De hecho, la retención de los
there's a
datos
commission, there's
personales,
some
hay una
body that
comisión
I
o hay
can't
un
even, I'm
cierto
drawing a blank now on who sets all of that and who
autoridad
is supposed to
gubernamental
overlook it.
que
There's
tiene que
a board
verificar
that is consistent of
que hay una
somebody from the Attorney
consistencia
General's
de si
office,
alguien
somebody from all these
está de
different
la oficina
agencies,
del procurador
the courts, everything
del
that's supposed to
Estado
look at
o
that and
alguien
scrutinize
tiene
it
que
on a
verificar y
regular
hacer un
basis, and it's just
escrutinio
not happening.
regularmente y parece que no está
Um,
ocurriendo.
But that's
Pero
why in this
esa es la
committee
razón
that oversees
por
data
la cual en
practices,
este
we've often
comité
now been saying this is
ciertas
how long you
prácticas que
can
hemos
and
venido
can't keep
diciendo, esto es
information.
lo
We
que
try to put
este es el tiempo
something
que
there,
tratamos
and
de
then
poner
if
ahí por
the agency has
escrito
pushback,
un
then we
término
always
y la
hear about
agencia
that.
tiene que
But
darnos su
it's a
punto de
longstanding
vista y nosotros
problem,
escuchamos. Es un
and the
problema
data
que
retention
continúa
schedule
siendo
isn't, it's not in statute
la
anywhere,
retención de
so
los
that we
datos
can
no
just
está en
easily
ningún
look it up as
estatuto o
members
regla,
of the legislature.
así que
But
podemos
it
ver
is
acá
really
a nivel de
concerning
la
if we have
legislatura,
an
pero nos preocupa mucho
inconsistency
que no tenemos
for one set
una
of
consistencia de una
folks
serie
compared to
de
another set of
personas
folks
comparados
and
para otro
hopefully
grupo de
find that that
personas
data is kept.
y
And one of
sobre
the
el tiempo
things
que
that
se
agencies
mantienen los
have to
datos.
do, I'm
Una de
sorry,
las
I'm going
cosas
to
que las
give a little
agencias
mini
tienen que
lesson
hacer,
there. But
es
one of
que
the
voy a
things
dar
that
una mini
agencies
lección, que
are
una de las
tasked with
cosas que
in
las agencias
statute is
deben
they
de
are
hacer
supposed to
conforme
be
con el
tasked with
estatuto,
keeping
tienen
that
que
data secure.
mantener esos datos
And
bajo
so
seguridad.
I understand the
Así que
bill's
entiendo
author
que
wanting to keep a tight
el
rein on
autor
this specific
quiere,
data,
de esta propuesta de ley, quiere tener
but at
esto,
the same time,
un tiempo
there
de
really
mantención
shouldn't
de
be
datos bastante
inconsistencies like
corto,
that.
pero veo que hay
I
una
think that's the things we
inconsistencia.
need to look at
Yo creo
as
que vamos a
a
tener que
committee,
darle
quite
un
frankly,
vistazo a nivel de
to
comité,
explore this whole
francamente,
issue
y
in
explorar el
greater depth.
punto con más
It does
profundidad,
concern me, Madam Chair,
porque de
that
veras
this
me
is only a
preocupa
14-day
que solo
retention
sea una
schedule
retención de 14
for
días a
this
los
particular
datos
data
para
set
este grupo de
compared to everybody
datos
else's.
en
So
comparación con el
with
resto
that,
de
I
la
mean,
población. Así que
we are where we are.
estamos donde
We didn't
estamos
know that
y
information
no
until this morning.
sabíamos de nada de
Um,
información
so,
sino hasta esta
and
mañana.
Madam Chair, while I've got the floor or the table, I
Señora
guess,
jefe del
I
comité,
noticed that the motion was to send this to Ways and Means, and I'm
esto
wondering
vamos a
now,
mandarlo al comité de medios y
amendments
arbitrios,
go
pero
on
que si
that
las
speak to
enmiendas
Secretary of
continúan,
State and voter, if that
de-
shouldn't go to State Gov or
si
the Elections Committee, something
esto
like that,
para
it seems to me
pasando
like
a un
that might
comité de
be,
elecciones, yo
that's
creo
the
que
amendments that we're taking,
eso
that might be
quizá
the course we might
será
want
el
to consider.
camino o el curso que podríamos
Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn, and
tomar.
thank you, Representative
Sí,
Scott. Just,
gracias
two things. First, on your
a
last point,
ustedes. En
on
el
the
punto
referrals, I did
anterior, lo que hice
run the
fue
language
que
that we're going to be adopting
se
by the
están
elections
sobre
chair because it really aligns
las
with
cláusulas, porque sí se
kind of what's
alinea.
already in place. He doesn't feel like he needs to see.
Él no siente que
He
necesita
doesn't feel like the amendment turns it into an elections bill.
ver
So that just
una enmienda
FYI,
al
I mean, I
enmienda.
understand there could be
Así
sort of
que
a
yo
differing
entiendo que puede ser una
kind of
una
interpretation of
diferencia
that, but that's
de
what the
interpretación,
elections
pero
chair is feeling
es lo
like
que
about the
el
language
jefe de les ha dicho
that
sobre
you're
las
proposing. And
cláusulas que
so I
ustedes
just
están
wanted to
proponiendo.
point out for
Pero
folks that
quería señalarles a
the
ustedes
term
que
non-compliant license,
los
this is the
licencias para
Transportation
personas que
Committee.
no
I
tienen
didn't know
una
this right until I kind of got
situación
into this bill, but
regularizada en Estados Unidos
non-compliant
y sus
license
licencias,
it
estas
doesn't refer
licencias
specifically,
no hacen referencia
it doesn't actually have anything to
específicamente
do
o
with
tiene
somebody's
nada que ver
immigration
con
status. It
la
means
situación
that
migratoria de alguien.
those
Solamente
licenses
dice
that
que
are
esos tipos de
regular Class
licencias
C licenses
tienen
and are not
unas
enhanced or
licencias
real
regulares
ID.
clase D
So
y
like
no
I
son
have a
aumentadas
non-compliant
ni son
license.
real
And
ID
so
o
the data provisions
identificación real.
here
Así que
apply to all non-compliant license holders,
la
citizens
regulación
and
acá dice
non-citizens, regardless of
que es
immigration
una
status. So I understand
licencia para todos
your
aquellos que
point
tengan
about
situación
treating
migratoria
different
regularizada o no.
data sets differently, but that's
Es
really
diferente,
about
son
those
diferentes
sort of different classes of
series de
licenses
datos
that are
porque son
available to
diferentes
people
clases
and the level of,
de
or
licencias
the number of
disponibles para
documents
las
that they're
personas y la cantidad de
that they have to
documentos
submit in order to
que ellos van a
get those
tener que
credentials.
presentar para
Of course, the
obtener
Real
esas
ID stuff
credenciales.
is
Es cierto, la Real
is
ID o
mostly federal
identificación
law. We don't have a
federal,
lot of like
esto lo regula, por
kind of
supuesto,
say
la
over that, but just
leyes
I wanted to
federales, y no
clarify
vamos
that
a meternos en
I
eso,
think
pero quería
yeah, I'm not
clarificar esto,
exactly sure if that was
porque
clear to
no
you,
estoy
that it's
seguro
not
si
just
le
for
quedó
like
claro a usted que no es solo
people who
para
can't
personas que
have
no
different
pueden,
immigration statuses.
es decir, que tienen
For whom
situación
that would be the data
migratoria
retention schedule
diferente
for all
y
class
el horario
non-compliant licenses.
sea nada más
Representative
para
Scott.
ellos,
Thank you,
para
Madam
la
Chair.
retención de los datos.
Since we have
Como
a representative
tenemos
here from
este
DPS, I'm
representante
wondering
del
if you could give
departamento
kind of an
de PS, ¿podría
explanation of why
darnos
the
una
data retention
explicación de por
schedule
qué la
is 10
retención
years
de los datos
and
son
what your thoughts are, if you
14
have any,
y qué
on this
piensa usted
change to 14 days?
sobre este cambio a 14
She's looking
días?
at somebody above her.
Well, and,
Like, am I going to get fired for answering this?
Representative Scott, the issue before us today is whether this
El asunto
A17
aquí
amendment
es
is going to go on.
el 17 va a
We
continuar
have
o no.
next week. We're
Tenemos
gonna
las siguientes,
into chapter
la semana
13 in
siguiente
more depth. I
en
know
el
we've got a lot of
capítulo
new
13
members who
para
are not
llegar más
familiar with
a
it. So,
profundidad.
we can dig into all
Sobre el
those
asunto
things.
vamos a ahondar y
I mean, we can
averiguar un
point to
poco
all
más,
kinds of places where
pero
the data
podemos
retention is
señalar
different, as you
muchos lugares donde
mentioned. So I think
la retención de los datos
before we
es
get too far
distinta.
afield, we've
Pero
got
antes de
a
llegar
work to do in
demasiado
this committee.
adelante, yo creo que
If somebody
tenemos
has
mucho
the answer
trabajo.
quickly,
Pero si alguien tiene la
that's
respuesta
fine.
aquí rápidamente, está
No,
bien.
I
Pero
would-
no sé, alguien
we're
está
getting
haciendo señas acá.
he does not have the answer
Él
quickly.
dice que no tiene la
if you could
respuesta
follow-
rápidamente.
if you
Entonces,
could
usted
follow
quizá
up,
puede hacer un
I'm not
seguimiento
going to parade
y
you down here
averiguar
and
la
say you don't know.
información. No quiero ponerlo acá en la cámara
You could
y el
follow
que
up
venga a
with my
decir cosas
staff,
que no
we can
sabe.
get
Así
that
que
information
usted puede
out
comunicarse
to
con
folks.
nuestro
Yeah, my concern, Madam Chair,
personal.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, was
Sí.
that evidently there's probably a reason for
Evidentemente
10
hay
years,
una
and I
razón
don't want
por
to be
la retención de 10
crippling what
años
they are
y
able
no
to
quiero
do as
estar
an agency by
hablando de esto una y otra vez. Así que muchas
Representative
gracias.
Hickey.
Thank you,
Representante Finke.
Chair Becker Finn. And I would just,
Gracias,
you
jefe
just said what I was
Beckerfield.
going to say, which is,
Es
as a
lo que
new
iba a
member, I
decir,
want to
es que
thank
como
Lee
miembro,
Scott for bringing up
miembro
this
nuevo,
data retention
esto de la
inconsistencies. And it sounds
retención de
like,
los
as someone who's
datos
very
es
concerned about data
inconsistente, alguien que
practices,
le
we'll have
preocupa
to take
mucho
that up.
sobre
It sounds like a
las
much larger issue
prácticas
that we're
sobre
dealing with in this amendment.
guardar los datos
Thank you.
confidenciales. Vemos que ese es un
Representative
asunto
Nesta.
mucho más
Thank you,
profundo,
Madam Chair.
mucho más que
And,
va más allá de lo que nos
Representative
ocupa.
Gomez,
Representante Gómez,
based on what you said, I'm
en base a lo
curious
que usted dijo,
whether
me causa curiosidad si
there are a number of people whose
hay
data
varias personas cuyos
who have
datos
applied for non-compliant licenses,
que han
including
solicitado
yourself,
por
and
este
have
tipo de
data at the
licencias
department. I'm wondering if
ante el departamento.
this language will require
Estas
the department
cláusulas
to
van a
destroy
requerir que se
significant amount of
destruya
data that they
una
have
gran
that they've
cantidad de
held for more
datos
than 14 days.
si la tienen por más de
Representative
14
Gomez.
días.
Thank you.
Representante
And I hope
Gómez.
that,
Y sí, yo espero que,
my friend was leaving so that somebody else
bueno,
could come up and
alguien
field
se
that
va, pero
question.
alguien puede
I don't
venir
like
conmigo y
standing up
ayudarme con esta
to help me out, but
pregunta, con esta respuesta.
I wouldn't know
Bueno,
the answer to that
yo
question.
no
That's a-
sabría
that's
esa
something
respuesta.
DPS
Esto es
would
algo
have
va
to,
más allá.
help me
Es
out
una
with.
pregunta para el DPS, el Departamento de Vehículos Motores.
We can roll up another chair. We
Yeah,
don't have
maybe
to
we're
keep,
gonna
yeah. Stay put, Representative
Representative
Perez-Vega.
Perez-Vega and I may be calling our friends a lot during this
That's a-
hearing,
that's-
so.
That's all right.
Okay.
Chapter
Muy
13
bien,
and data stuff
entonces
is
el
everybody's favorite topic.
capítulo 13
Please
es el
introduce yourself for the record and go ahead.
retención de los
Madam
datos.
Chair, my name is Jordan Altasher
Jordan
Hyde,
me
and I'm
llamo
the
y
Legislative Director for the Department of
soy
Public Safety.
director del legislativo del
The
Departamento de
bill does not
Vehículos
reference if
Motores
it is retroactive,
y
so at this point in
es
time, I
las
don't believe
referencias
it's
acá son
retroactive.
retroactivas,
We'll need to confirm with.
pero necesito confirmar
who's not in the
Any
room.
follow-up?
algún seguimiento.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. No,
No, gracias, jefa del comité.
That seems like an important thing. that
Esto
we
me
should clear
parece
up
algo que
and
es importante
get
que
a
vamos
better
a tener que
understanding
seguir
of what the
averiguando
effect of
para
that
poder
is and
entender lo que
whether the
efectos
department has
tendría
the
la
resources
retención
to
y si el
actually
departamento
carry that
tiene
out,
los
if that's
recursos para
a
cumplir con
large
este
administrative task
mandato,
they're gonna have
porque
after
esos
passing this
serían
bill.
trabajos administrativos muchos más,
Madam Chair and members,
con mucho
looking
más
at
tarea.
first engrossment on page 9.
Ahora, en la página
lines
9,
24 to 26, the
en
effective
la
date for the
línea
act
16,
says that it's
de-
effective for
dice
driver's
que tiene
licenses and
eficacia para los
expedited
efectos de las
card
licencias y de
identification card application and
tarjeta de
issuance
identificación
on or after October
para
1st,
él y
2023.
antes después de él,
So I don't
después
believe that
él o
there's any
antes del
intent of
octubre.
retroactivity for any of the.
No estamos viendo que haya esto, que haya
All right.
retroactividad,
Representative Feist.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
porque esto
I think
sería de a partir del
actually
octubre de
more
2023.
straightforward than we're thinking it is. The information about the people who
La
are
información sobre
applying
las
for the driver's
personas
license is
que están
retained.
solicitando,
That's one of the main goals
que
of this
si
bill
lo
is
que es
to
la
know
meta
who are
de
on our roads.
esta
And that's
comité en
issue.
este momento es
The
el
only
asunto de la
documents that
seguridad
would be
pública. Los
destroyed
únicos
after 14
documentos
days
que
are
se
the
destruirían
identity
después de
documents that
14
are used
días
to apply
únicamente
for
son
the
los
driver's
documentos de
license.
identidad
So the
para
issue there is that
solicitar
we
las
don't want that
licencias.
information to
O
be
sea, no
used
queremos que
to
esa
either
esa
determine
documentación
immigration status
sea
by the
utilizada
government,
para
because
otro
that's not the
asunto.
goal here. At our state level. And so just to be clear, all of the information about these
Para
people
tener
who are applying
claridad
for the
sobre la
driver's license
información,
will
las
be
personas que
retained according to the
aplican,
normal timeline. It is
pues
just the
solicitan
identity
únicamente,
documents
son los
they
documentos de
use
identidad
to
que ellos
apply for those
utilizaron
driver's
para
licenses that would
solicitar
be destroyed.
esto.
Thank you,
Es lo que se va a
Immigration Attorney
destruir.
Representative Feist. Representative Johnson, and then we're going to move to the amendment.
Chair Becker, Finn, members, one of the reasons they keep this data for 10 years is a big problem that we have. I'm sure Representative Grosso in his career in law enforcement has dealt with it. I've dealt with it numerous times, and that's identity theft. How they get the identity theft, and they get driver's license. We have people that have falsified driver's license and gotten driver's license under other people's names. And because they keep that data, they can verify and go back to the verification person. So the person whose identity was stolen, things can be flagged by looking up the records and the documents that they have to verify that they're giving the right person their actual identity back. And without those records, it makes it very difficult to go back and look at things, because it's when somebody steals your driver's license identification, it might be 2-3 years before you find out. And if those records are destroyed, there's no way to get your identity back, and somebody could actually assume your life because the documentation isn't there anymore.
And as we all just learned, apparently it's 10 years. So with that, Representative Scott, I understand there's an amendment to the amendment, the A19. Representative Scott, would you like to move the A19?
Yes, Madam Chair and committee, I would like to move the A19.
Representative Scott, would you like to tell us what the A19 does?
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the bill's author and others that worked on. I submitted
Parece que
the
tenemos un poquito
A18
de
and that got
problema
a conversation
escuchando
going
a la otra
about
intérprete. Estamos
um,
coordinando
the
su
A18 and
paciencia.
what it was
Muchísimas
trying to
gracias por su
accomplish. So
paciencia.
this language was I guess compromise language, as we say around here. And what this bill or what this amendment does is it just says that the information that does pertain to a person's immigration status can be shared with the Office of the Secretary of State for purposes of making the voter rolls accurate, basically. And this also says that the Office of the Secretary of State cannot disseminate or share that information beyond their office. And so that's what the amendment does. And I did speak with the Secretary of State on the phone last night. I don't know if he was able to get anybody here in the room this morning, but he said he is more than glad to work on this issue going forward if there's any changes to the language that need to happen. So with that, I would ask for member support. He was supported, by the way, but if there's anybody here that wants to speak to that, I don't know.
To our bill author, Representative Gomez, your response on the A19.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Becker-Finn, and thank you so much, Representative Scott, for bringing this amendment forward and working with us kind of late in the evening last night on it. As Representative Scott said, it's just designed to ensure that the existing data sharing relationship between the department and the Secretary of State's office remains intact, just for the purposes of administering elections. So I hope members will support it.
And Madam Chair, thanks.
Representative Scott.
I do want to thank staff who worked on this, both nonpartisan and partisan, who worked on this late into the evening last night, and then we're here for an 8:30 meeting. So, thank you.
Yeah, for the record, it wasn't actually that late for how late we sometimes work here at but late for the beginning of session. Yes, it did make the 8:15 cutoff in our email inboxes. So, yeah, and I do want to thank everyone for working together. This is how it's supposed to work, that you guys have the conversations and we reach some compromise language. So, Representative Scott, we're going to go on to the A19. So Representative Scott moves the A19 amendment to the A17 amendment. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? If the motion prevails and the amendment is adopted, the amendment to the amendment is adopted. So now back to the underlying A17 amendment. And just to be clear, Representative Scott, so we're not going to be moving the A18. So members can go ahead and recycle that one in their packets.
That would be correct.
All right, thank you. We've already had quite a bit of discussion on the underlying A17. So I'm going to move on to the A17 as amended. All those in favor of the A17 amendment as amended, I'm going to renew my motion on that. Please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
All right, the motion prevails and the amendment as amended is adopted. All right, with that, we will get to the bill in the shape that the authors would like. So we are on House File 4 as amended, and I understand that we do have a couple testifiers, but Representative Gomez, I'll go to you to talk about the bill.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Becker-Finn and members of the committee. House File 4 is driver's licenses for all. It reverts us to pre-2003 Minnesota policy. For decades, up until 2003, people were able to demonstrate that they, through a written and behind-the-wheel test, that they understood the rules of the road and could safely operate a vehicle without regard to immigration status. In 2003, this policy was changed. And so this just, allows people access to a driver's license. I just really briefly, we had a hearing, we had heard hours of testimony in the Transportation Committee a couple nights ago. We had an early morning session and then an evening session. We heard from directly impacted people. We heard about what the impacts of not having a license are on someone's life. We heard stories of people being deported for getting pulled over for a brake light that was out and not having a driver's license and getting into those proceedings. We also heard from a wide variety of businesses, including the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. I actually have a letter I'm going to ask the page maybe can hand out. We heard from law enforcement about how this is a public safety issue. We received a letter of support from the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association supporting this bill as submitted yesterday. We heard from faith leaders who talked to us about how this is an issue related to human dignity and respect for everyone's humanity. We heard from labor leaders. And one of the things that somebody pointed out to me was, that in previous years, we heard a lot from people who themselves didn't have access to a driver's license. And on Tuesday, we heard a lot from children, young people whose parents hadn't had access to a driver's license. And that, to me, that was some of the most compelling testimony of hearing, young people talk about what it's like to know that when you're getting in a car with your parents, that you might be separated from them, and that kind of the fear and the trauma that some of these young people were carrying from their early childhood into their young adulthood because of this policy. So, but we really are here today to discuss Article 2, the data protections, which begin on page 10. And as I mentioned, the intent with the data protection provisions were really just to ensure that the personal data that has to be collected is just used for its intended purposes and not other purposes. So I don't know if Rep. Perez Vega wants to say, but we know
Go
you
ahead.
guys-
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I just want to address the testimony that was given in transportation, kind of echoing with Representative Gomez stated, but also in regard to a conversation that I held with one of our colleagues in the House, Representative Ethan Chan, who received his driver's license before he became a citizen. And folks like himself who are citizens that had received their licenses prior to becoming citizens, and the challenge that it must be for folks in our immigrant community that want to become citizens, that are working to become citizens, the challenge that it is for them to accomplish that without having a driver's license. The challenges and the fear that go beyond their head of trying to become citizens while they may be pulled over illegally or driving illegally, or that's not an option because they're following the law. And I just want to highlight that and the importance of what good citizenship is allowing to make it easier for folks to be a part of this country who work hard, who have children that are citizens of this country. Deep thought. Muchas gracias. Thank you, member. Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you. We do have a couple testifiers who had signed up, so I'm going to move to them. I have Ms. Vina Iyer. Please introduce yourself and go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn, Lead Scott, Chair Gomez, Representative Perez Vega, and committee members. I am Vina Iyer. I am the Executive Director of the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, and we are proud to be here to testify in support of HF4, the restoration of driver's licenses for all, and particularly today about the data privacy and protection provisions of this bill, which are critical in this age of ubiquitous data sharing and data mining. The data provisions of this bill, as amended by A17 and A19, primarily amend Minnesota statutes 171.12, the main data privacy and disclosure section of the driver's licensing statute. The bill adds a subdivision 1 to section 171.12, which prohibits DPS from sharing certain information collected during the driver's licensing process, particularly information related to citizenship and immigration status. Walking through the data privacy provisions of the bill and the amendments, I'll start first with the first engrossment, then turn to the A17 and then the A19. In the first engrossment of the bill, Article 2, Section 4, adds that subdivision 11 that I was talking about. It prohibits DVS from releasing information that identifies or has the effect of identifying an individual's citizenship status or lawful presence outside of DVS. Next, turning to your attention to the A17. This provides additional detail regarding the type of information that is generally prohibited from release under the new section 171.12, subdivision 11. This provision requires that prior to the disclosure of any data regarding a non-compliant driver's license, regardless of who has that license, DPS or its agents must obtain a certification that the recipient will not use the data for civil immigration purposes or disclose the data to an immigration enforcement agency. It also establishes penalties for the violation pursuant to the Data Privacy Act. Finally, turning to the A19 amendment, this amendment clarifies and has been discussed already that that this bill would maintain that data sharing relationship between DVS and the Secretary of State. In short, the data privacy provisions of this bill and the amendments focus on placing strict restrictions on sharing data that could be used to identify an applicant's citizenship or immigration status. The provisions ensure that the routine act of applying for a driver's license does not open the door to deportation and family separation. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next on the list, I have Linus Chan. Please introduce yourself and go ahead with your testimony.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chair Becker-Finn and the rest of the committee for having me. My name is Linus Chan. I teach at the University of Minnesota Law School, and I run a clinic that represents people held in immigration detention by ICE. I'm here specifically to talk about why these provisions are so necessary and what is actually happening both nationally and in other states. And I want to turn attention to a couple things. One, there was a report that was issued by Georgetown, which was entitled Immigration Dragnet, that really details exactly and how information such as driver's information is being used in a certain amount of database and for immigration enforcement. To give an idea of the scope and the expansion of the use of this data, I want to point to the fact that in 2008, the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement specifically spent around $75 million on data analysis and getting data. In 2021, that number expanded to over $400 million. Part of that, much of that spending has been in the creation and the use of databases, but it also includes about $50 million on spending for data brokers. One of the important provisions of this bill and this amendment specifically, which is to prevent the reselling of data from private data brokers such as LexisNexis in order to do so. And I wanted to give a couple really quick idea of what's going on here. So because of this access on driver's information, it's estimated that 1 in 3 adults, or over 88 million people, drivers in the United States, ICE has their information already. There is increased push to get access to facial recognition that is also stored with the databases of a lot of state driver's license. And this is already happening in terms of other states and having access to driver's license and registration information. And so really I want to emphasize here that while it may seem that this data practices protection is only for specific members of the community, one thing I want to highlight to everybody is in order to track non-citizens, what has to happen is it means that citizens are tracked as well. So any sort of restriction and protection of data for any members of the community helps every member of the community. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Representative Scott, was this for this testifier?
Actually, I have a question for him and the previous testifier.
Okay, I've got a
real quick.
list going, so
Okay.
we'll get to you.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chan, for your testimony. With that, are there any members of the public who did not sign up who would like to testify? Please
Madam Chair.
introduce yourself for the record and go ahead with your testimony.
Madam Chair, my name is Rich Newmeister. I have 2 points. One is if you look at 17112 subdivision 7, which is not in the bill, you will see that there's the Federal Privacy Protection Act, which was done because of a tragedy almost 20 years ago with actress Maria Soledano. That certain restrictions of how data can be, driver's license data can be disseminated. So my first question is, how will this impact
Entonces, mi primera pregunta sería, ¿cómo impactaría esto la diseminación de todas estas, para todas estas partes, para los efectos de seguro para el vehículo, para los procesamiento de los datos, procesamiento para la licencia? ¿Y qué tipo de nuevos estándares estarían allí para...
Again, we're not talking about documents.
No estamos hablando de los documentos, estamos hablando
basic information,
de información
name and address,
básica
for law enforcement purposes,
para los efectos de récord de la policía y estos, por ejemplo, fotografías y todas estas otras entidades. Esa es mi primera pregunta. Y la segunda es en términos de la enmienda 17. Si ustedes miran la línea 219 y 220, es el punto que acabo de hablar. Y ustedes como hacedores de las leyes podrían decir que significa esto y cómo impacta. Persona es cualquier persona de conformidad con la ley. Y si la persona no utiliza, no puede usar los datos para otros efectos migratorios. Si miramos a la subdivisión 7 que usted acaba de decir, que le cuenta cuáles son las excepciones, estas partes pueden recibir estos datos. No tiene impedimento de conformidad con la parte de esta ley. Entonces sería esto el nuevo estándar. Entonces, miembros de este comité y señora jefa del comité, les presento dos puntos de vista que creo que son muy importantes y que ustedes como hacedores de la ley
any other members of the public wishing to
Gracias por su
testify?
testimonio. ¿Alguien más que desea
All right,
testificar?
not seeing any, we will move on to member discussion. We'll remind everybody that our discussion and the reason that this bill is here is Article 2. Done a pretty good job so far of sticking to Article 2, so we're going to keep that up. First on the list, I have Representative Feist.
I'm so sorry, Madam Chair, but it wasn't a data thing. I just wanted to say that I strongly support
Representative Feist, we're going to follow the rules.
That's fair.
Representative Scott.
Wow, harsh.
Just remember this when you guys do the same thing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a question. One question for each of the previous testifiers, Ms. Iyer and Mr. Chan.
All right. They didn't go far.
They didn't. They were very handy.
Están todavía.
Oh, they're going to share the chair?
We got locked.
Go one at a time. It's okay.
All right.
Bueno, podemos hacer la pregunta uno por uno.
All right. All right. So Representative Scott, your question for
Thank you.
Director
Thank you, Ms.
Iyer.
Ayers. I'm wondering what your thoughts are. One of the things that this committee has done in the past is when we're setting up this data sharing
cuando estamos
thing, one of the things that
hablando
we
de
also
esto,
do is to
compartiendo los
create some
datos,
sort of
una de las
requirement for
cosas
an
que hemos
audit
hecho
or
es
an audit
crear
trail
un
so that
requisito de auditoría o un
the
camino
public
para
has a way
auditoría
of
para
going
que el
back and
público
making
tenga
sure
una
that the
manera de
law is
regresar y
being followed.
asegurarse que la ley se está cumpliendo.
Is that anything
¿Es
that
esto de
maybe
alguna
this is to the
manera,
bill author too?
bueno, pregunta también para la autora de
Is
la
that something that
propuesta de ley,
you believe
pero
would
¿es algo que
be
usted
belt
cree que
suspenders here? Because I think it should be common practice.
como
Anytime that
debe
we're
ser
sharing
una
data
práctica común de cada vez que
in government,
compartimos
that
datos
an
en el
audit trail should
gobierno,
be
que haya
that
una
an audit
auditoría
trail should be required.
y
There should
que,
be role-based access to that
y que haya un
information.
acceso a esa
There should
información
be, as
y
you put
que,
it here, you put the
como usted
date
lo
for the
dice,
data to
usted pone la
be
fecha de los datos en
purged.
que se debe de quitarlos,
And then
destruir la
some sort of a data
información de
report
los datos,
summary
pero en
to the
relación
public so that they know that the
para
law
que
is
también se le
actually
pueda dar al público
followed.
un resumen y el público pueda
Ms.
saber
Ayers,
qué
I know
está
that's a
pasando y
big
si se está
mouthful
cumpliendo
from
la
me,
ley.
but
Yo sé que esta es
your
una
thoughts.
pregunta
And
bastante fuerte, pero
Representative
si tiene
Gomez, I
alguna respuesta,
apologize when Representative Gomez
representante
asked what
Gómez,
she needed to do to
cuando
prepare for this
preguntó si
committee.
se
I did not
necesitaba
warn you that
prepararse
she
para
was
este
going to ask
comité,
about
no le
audit
dije que
trails.
ella le iba a hacer todas las
So,
preguntas sobre el seguimiento de los
Director
seguimientos de
Iyer, if
auditoría.
you're able to answer that question.
¿Usted podría
Thank you so
contestar
much,
esa pregunta?
Representative
Sí,
Scott.
muchas
I'm just
gracias,
going to defer
representante
to
Scott. Le voy a dar
Mr.
la
Chan
palabra
on that question.
al licenciado
Go
Chan
ahead,
para
Mr.
que
Chan.
conteste esta
Thank you,
pregunta.
Representative Scott.
Muchas
I
gracias.
actually helped work
Yo,
on
de
a
hecho,
similar
he
provision in
trabajado en
Virginia.
una
And the
regulación
Virginia
parecida
data
en Virginia, en
practice
la base de datos
did
de
require
Virginia. Sí
specific audit
requiere
trails.
estos
One of the
seguimientos
things
de
that we
auditoría.
learned
Y
is
una
that
de las
audits,
cosas que
unfortunately, really depend very strongly
afortunadamente
on
depende, estas auditorías
whether and
dependen
how
de
much the
si y cuánto
agencies decide
las
to
agencias
do those
deciden
audits.
hacer estas
So which is
auditorías.
why is an
Entonces es la razón
alternative
por la
to
cual
the
es una
audits is
alternativa a las
requiring the
auditorías.
penalty
Estamos
provisions
requiriendo
and specifically the
las
right of action. We feel that
sanciones
those are
acá,
very
que estos
strong
son
indicators of
grandes
preventing
indicadores para prevenir que
people or bad faith actors from
las
breaking
personas
these
que
data
no
privacy
tienen
protection.
derecho
There is
ingresen
nothing,
a esta
in my
base de
understanding,
datos.
and
No hay
please, if
nada, y
Department of Public
permítame
Safety
por
can
favor, el
correct me,
Departamento de Seguridad
from Department of
de
Public
Vehículos
Safety from
Motores
conducting audits on
puede
their
corregirme.
own
Ellos están
and making
conduciendo
sure
sus
those
propias
are
auditorías
there,
y están
but it
asegurándose que
wasn't
tienen
as
los
high of a
datos bajo
priority
seguridad,
in
pero
terms of making
eso a
it
veces
into
no
the
ha sido
amendment
una
specifically.
prioridad.
We recognize its value and
Y
its use, and I
reconocemos que
certainly
es
would
valioso y que debe
agree
de
that they
usarse
are
y
important,
estaríamos de
but
acuerdo
we
que
found
también
that
es
the
importante,
other
pero
provisions and the penalty provisions
sabemos que las
may be more
provisiones,
effective at
las
preventing
regulaciones
these
sobre
effective.
I understand
sanciones
Mr. Hopkins may have some
mucho más
information for us as
eficaces.
well.
Madam Chair,
Usted también
Representative Scott
tiene
and
información,
members,
sí, representantes
so
y miembros de este
section
comité, la sección
171.12, which
171.
contains
Tal,
will contain the new
dice
subdivision
que
11, which you see
contendrá
in
la
the
nueva
A17
subdivisión
amendment.
11.
That's the
Ustedes
section
verán en
that
la
deals with
enmienda A17. Esta sección
data
trata
practices for
de
the for driver's licenses.
para los efectos de
And
las licencias
subdivision
de manejar.
1A of that
Y
section,
en
which
esta
isn't amended in
subdivisión
the
también
bill,
habla de una
which
enmienda
is
en la
current law,
propuesta de ley, que es la
requires
ley que
DVS
está
to have
vigente, que
rule-based
requiere que el
access for
DBS
driver and
tenga
vehicle
acceso
services
a
information
la
system. It
información
requires audit trails and
y
already
tiene
requires an
también la
independent biannual
obligación
audit.
de
So those
hacer
things will also
seguimientos de
will
auditoría,
also
así que
pertain to
esto
these
también
new
se le aplicaría
non-compliant
a estas
licenses as well.
nuevas licencias
With
que
my
se
law
están
professor hat
proponiendo
on,
en
we'll
la
always
ley.
remind members, if you go back and look at the overall
Si
statute,
ustedes
a lot of times you
observan
can
y
get
miran
the
el
answers if you have time to
estatuto,
do
puede
that.
usted
Representative
ver
Scott.
Thank you,
las
and thank you,
respuestas más
Mr.
adelante.
Hopkins,
Sí,
for that
muchas
answer.
gracias por su
My response
respuesta,
to you,
porque en respuesta a
Mr.
usted, señor
Chan,
Chan,
was going to be the penalties are fine, but how is the
las
public, how's the
sanciones
person
está
ever
bien,
going to
pero
know
¿cómo el
if
público,
there's
la
no audit
persona
trail
va a
created?
saber
How are
si
they going to
no
know who's
se ha
responsible for
creado
sharing or
seguimiento de
missharing
auditoría?
your information? Thank you. And Ms. Ayers, one
Pero,
question
señora
that I
Ayers,
had
tengo una
is, how
pregunta.
will the agents, and maybe this
¿Cómo
again is
estas
for the author
agencias,
too,
y tal vez es
how will
también
the
para usted,
DVS
cómo el
agents
DBS
and those folks, how
y
will they
estas
know
personas, cómo sabrían ellos
what can be shared and what can't?
qué es lo que se puede
How will that
compartir de
be
la información y qué no se puede
explained,
compartir de la
and how will
información?
they
¿Cómo
be
se les
no?
explicaría y cómo sabrían ellos?
Director Iyer.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn. Thank you, Representative
Muchas
Scott.
gracias, miembros del
That would be
comité.
a matter of, I
Sí,
think, both
sería
a
un
matter of training and
asunto
whether that
de
would be
entrenamiento
addressed in
para el Departamento de Vehículos
rulemaking,
Motores
but frankly, I think it would be mostly a
y
training
sería
issue
más que todo
to
un
make
asunto de
sure that
entrenamiento.
they understand those issues.
Thank you.
All right.
Muy
Not seeing
bien.
any other members on the list. Representative Gomez,
No
Representative
viendo
Perez
a nadie
Vega.
más.
Any closing remarks on
Algunos
House File 4?
argumentos de cierre.
Just our thanks for your consideration,
Sí,
Madam
muchísimas
Chair and
gracias por tomar
members,
en
and
cuenta
again,
y
thank
tomar
you to
en
Representative Scott for
consideración
working with
esta
us.
propuesta.
All right.
Eso es todo.
With that, we'll move on to the vote.
Con
I
eso
will renew my
pasamos a
motion that
votar.
House File
Quiero
4 as
traer la
amended
moción de
be
la
recommended to be
se
referred to the Committee on
recomienda que se
Ways and
refiere al
Means.
Comité de
All those
Medios y
in favor, please
Arbitrios.
say aye.
Todos que están a
Aye.
favor para que se
Opposed?
remita esta ley al
The
Departamento
motion
de
prevails,
Medio de
and
Arbitrios.
the bill is on its
Queda
way to Ways and
aprobado.
Means. Thank you,
Entonces,
members.
esta propuesta de ley pasa al Departamento de Medios y Arbitrios de la legislatura. Y nuevamente les pedimos muchísimas disculpas por los fallos técnicos. Esperamos que hayan podido tener una idea. Esta próxima vamos a parar la información la introducción, la interpretación en este momento, porque se terminó de discutir la propuesta de ley que nos interesa a la comunidad latina, la HF4. Muchas gracias.
Nadia.